And thank you all for your patience as we got set up this morning. So, I'm going to start with a question for Ernesto. Because he was playing hurling last night and he was really good, and I'm told that he might well be signed up to play for Kilkenny. So,
No, I heard today that, validation is very important. I like it very much. But after yesterday, I thought, I'm going to move to Iceland and we are going to start a hurling team. But they told me today that it's not a professional sport, so I cannot make money out of it. So I have to work on validation still.
You'll have to work in validation and play hurling. But we think that's okay. We can do that. But Ernesto, you've just completed a huge body of work working with all the European member states, completing inventories. Can you tell us a bit about that and the emerging learning and where you think things are going?
Yeah, actually, yesterday it was published. Finally, the European Inventory and Validation is online now at CEDEFOP. And I have to say that it has been a lot of work, and many of the people that are here in the room have worked on it and have contributed very much to it. So to all of you, thank you very much. It has been really a lot of work. We worked, the inventory, for those that don't know, is a European kind of project that we have in CEDEFOP since 2004. We have been collecting information on what the member states are doing on validation of non-formal and informal learning. It is done together with the European Commission, and Aline will be talking about the policies in the EU later, and with the European Training Foundation. Maria couldn't make it today, unfortunately. She should have been in this panel. So it's really a project where we come together with the Commission and the ETF, and all the member states provide us a lot of information. There is a contracting agency. We have a contractor that does some of the reporting, but then the member states are the ones who read the reports, give us feedback. So as I say, a lot of the people here have put a lot of work, in fact, of their time in the inventory. So there's a lot of information there. And this is also one of the challenges we have always with the inventory, because it's very difficult to kind of bring it together, all these different contexts. And one thing that you realize being here in the Biennale is that the context, global context, is even more complex and more difficult to bring in. So the work that the people for him are doing on the global NQFs is quite, you can see that it's a challenge to work in international organizations like you guys. So what we have found in the inventory, as very brief, because that's the important part, is that at the European level, I think there is a consolidation of the frameworks of the legal parts of validation in a way. So there is a lot of work that has been done on kind of setting up the systems, I think. In a lot of the areas, of course, there's still some frameworks that don't exist or some parts of the system that are not accessible through validation. But I think there is a consolidation. And this we already saw in 2018 in the previous inventory. What I think we see is there's need for outreach, kind of getting people in, but especially those that are more marginalized. And I think, again, here, some of the experiences that Canada, the US, Canada has had with indigenous people, for example, we can learn quite a bit from them, because I think they are doing a very good job in getting to the place where the indigenous people are, in a way, and that's something that maybe in Europe is less localized. And I think with some of the marginalized populations in Europe, this can help, or less advantage. And then I think that we need to kind of work on the resources. Let's say, how are we going to provide resources, the financing? How are we going to create systems that are sustainable? So I think that's kind of overall, very briefly, because I don't want to take more time, the general thing. But it's there now. Thank you very much for all of those that have contributed. And we are always happy to have feedback on what can be improved, what needs to be done. We will be working on making an interactive tool where we can kind of connect a little bit the European guidelines on validation with the information that there is in the countries. And another thing that maybe just to make sure, the ETF has done also some of the work, and so we have also ETF countries in the inventory. Thanks.
Can you just explain a little about the work the ETF has done, Ernesto? Because a lot of people wouldn't know the European Training Foundation.
They are doing a tremendous work, and maybe I'm not the best person to talk about it. Maybe I think they have been working also with ILO a little bit. I think with UNESCO, some of the they have also have cooperation. So maybe you want to come in. But I think that they have been working a lot with the neighboring countries. Now I can remember exactly all the 11 countries they have done. They have also a report on what is happening in their countries. And the ETF does do a lot of kind of work with the countries in setting up the systems. And they have also a project in Africa, actually, dealing with validation. In the inventory specifically, it is more, as I say, the neighboring countries. And they have found that, again, there are a lot of work being done. Some of their systems are less developed, so they are starting. But I think in general terms, I would say there has been quite a move also in establishing those systems, especially in the vocational training and the kind of parallel systems of formal education.
Thanks, Ernesto. Christine, your work is much more on a global scale, isn't it? Do you find resonance with what Ernesto is sharing? Could you tell us about that?
Yes. Thank you very much. Indeed, I mean, the ILO is not just another abbreviation, and I've had to explain to a couple, so maybe I'll just share some general introduction as well to who we are and what we do. So the ILO is, the International Labour Organization, is a specialized UN agency, older than the UN. And we are the only UN agency that has workers and employers as our members. So among the 187 member countries, each delegation always comes with workers and employers, and hence they have a very important say in everything we do. We've been created to promote social justice, but promote it through international labor standards. These standards can be conventions that countries ratify or recommendations. And hence our raison d'être is to promote these standards and to support countries in implementing them. Now, what resonated a lot with the work we're doing from also the keynote yesterday, that I really found very stimulating, is the notion of identity and of professional identity. Because the two key actors in the world of work that create identity and that contribute to creating identity are the organizations and the communities of workers and the communities of employers, or the professional communities that act. So maybe also to say that the ILO promotes decent work. We don't promote decent labor. So there's also unpaid care work, right? There is volunteer work. Everything is work. And when we had our commission on the future of work for our 100-year centenary, that commission issued a report, and the report said, very clearly said, that skills are not only for employability, but skills are for participation in democracy. So this is an important recognition, I think, that the ILO has made recently. So what do? We provide policy advice, technical assistance, research, capacity building to our members and constituents. I've counted, we've probably supported around 15 countries directly in the establishment of what we call recognition of prior learning systems. There is capacity building through our Turin center. They have just put a MOOC, a free MOOC, on their e-campus, so that's available for everyone, for policymakers, but also practitioners. We support networks like there's an African network on skills and apprenticeships, SASASNet. They've requested support on recognition of prior learning. And I think in terms of trends, where there's also a lot of requests in the care economy now. And maybe before talking about trends in learning, and then we could maybe get to that in the next question, is just to highlight that within our international labor standards, several refer already to recognition of prior learning. So there is the recommendation on human resource development from 2004, that already promotes the idea of recognition of prior learning. There is recommendation 204 on transitions to formality. So the ILO has been working a lot on the issue of informal economy and transitioning to the formal economy. So there you have a reference to recognizing prior learning in the informal economy, particularly through informal apprenticeship. And now, very recently, last year, our members have adopted recommendation 208 on quality apprenticeships. And in this instrument, you have a definition of recognition of prior learning. I'm not going to spoil it, because I want you to read it. But there is an internationally agreed definition now. Thanks.
That's really interesting. Sorry, I get so wound up in these things. Anyway, that was fascinating, Christine. Thank you. Brikena, from the perspective of I suppose the individual, which is kind of where we all stand, because we come as ourselves, don't we? We can't wear anyone else's shoes. And the work of the European Lifelong Learning Platform, when you hear this exciting work and you listen to it, how do you respond?
Well, first, good morning to everyone. And I know many of you are probably morning person. I'm not, so bear with me. It's a challenge. But also, most of you are probably practitioners, and I'm not. At least, I don't do this on a daily basis. So I would just wanted to clarify that. And what I want to say with that is that the work that we do at the Lifelong Learning Platform is more an enabler to what you actually doing on the ground and making sure that all this work that is done is brought up through different channels at the policy and decision-making table. And so we are a civil society organization representing individuals, stakeholders, institutions, education and training providers in all their forms and all their roles within the system at European level to play this role of advocating for the right to lifelong learning and the right to validation as well for all. So when I hear institutions, organizations, agencies, specialized agencies that are actually informing our policies at EU or international level, speak indeed about their different policies, obviously the first thing is that it reminds us of our role of making sure that civil society organizations are part of your work and that they have a say and that they can inform these policies, they can inform this data. And the idea behind is that we make sure that they are made with the learner at the center, with the individual at the center, tailoring those policies to their needs and make sure that they represent what is actually needed. So it's obviously a difficult job to do because very often, I mean, you mentioned employers and workers, of course, but there is so much more in the community out there that probably are not even a worker or an employer that we also wish have a say and be represented in those policies. So it's very important that we make sure that no one is left behind on those. And one of the things that we see at European level as well in terms of policies is this hierarchy of yeah, maybe very often policies prioritize formal qualifications, formal degrees, full degrees, diplomas, rather than validation of prior learning or more, flexible certifications, micro-certifications. So we see that, unfortunately, still being a main trend. And for many reasons, obviously, because we see that policies tend to work better and prioritize what is already well established and they are more familiar with. So the formal qualifications, formal education and training systems, they have been there for centuries. They are quite well established. So it's easier to recognize the work and to prioritize that type of recognition versus validation. Another thing that we see is that very often, validation, I saw also yesterday during the different sessions, many of us mentioned how much flexibility we need when we talk about validation, when we design validation processes, because we need also more creative assessment methods. And often policies or policymakers are afraid of something that is too flexible or too creative, because it can mean a lot of more work probably. So they will tend to focus on something that is already quite clearly defined with criteria and benchmarks that are clear. And then another thing that we also see being a big issue that we are still trying to fight against is this perception that we have of validation being less prestigious, less rigorous versus degrees and qualifications and diplomas that are much more prestigious. And unfortunately, very often we still see, although there has been a lot of progress, and you mentioned that progress, of course, but we still see that policies kind of reinforce that bias, and by indeed prioritizing always formal qualifications, and that's it's actually not helping out, and we are missing out on this pool of talents and expertise that we can tap through validation. And what is also important in our, we see with our member organizations that are, as by definition, are closer to the communities, the civil society organizations, non-profit organizations, working with the communities, with marginalized communities and with people that are more disadvantaged, is that well, very often we think that people want a qualification, but that's not necessarily what everyone wants. They just want to be valued and visible, and they might be just happy with going through the process without necessarily ending up with the certification. So that process itself is empowering them. So we need to keep in mind the different needs and intentions that people have for going through validation, and being careful in balancing, in making it, in keeping it flexible and not making it too formal.
This is so interesting, because I think that does capture follows beautifully some of what you were saying, Christina, about the informal apprenticeships and moving towards formality, and that really interesting space so often on the margins where creativity often flourishes and brings us really exciting ideas. Raúl, you've been working in such an exciting space. Can you tell us about it? I think it's better coming from you than my trying to summarize any of it. So much learning.
Thank you very much. It's really a pleasure to be here. Good morning, everybody. In a way, I think that Boren yesterday summarized a little bit what UNESCO has been doing in the field, the relevance of the topic for us, and particularly, I would say, for the UNESCO Institute for Lifelong Learning, it has been a privilege to accompany these biennales, and I think it's quite amazing how it's growing. Not just more people, even in the morning we can see that this is already full, but coming from different regions, from different approaches, the policy, the procedures, everything is like very clearly represented, so it's really nice to learn from the experiences in here. Particularly the work we have been doing at the UNESCO Institute for Lifelong Learning is, in the last couple of years, has been to focus very much on migrants, refugees, asylum individuals that have been unable to being recognized different competences. And for that, we have been developing a series of work different elements that are very much based on the starting of a literature review that we try to take stock of the situation of RBA with migrants and refugees at the global level. So we were able to go into the English and French literature, how is that moving? And on that basis, we move into a second piece of work that was more focusing on 9 countries from 3 different regions. How then Latin America is coping with it, how the Southeast Asian countries are dealing with it, and how the Arab region. Just three countries, I need to be specific on that, but it allows us to go a little deeper on this process. On that basis, we produce a policy brief, and the 2 last elements that are also supporting this research are, it's a toolkit that we are developing for policymakers in order to understand themselves where they are in terms of policies for RBA systems for migrants and refugees, and in which direction they can move based on experiences we can take from these countries. And then last year, we started a pilot for an online course on RBA for migrants and refugees, and it was very well accepted. We have, in the pilot, 40 participants from 13 different countries. But I need to say that in these 5 elements, we were very much relying on the work of people that is here. I mean, the experience of the researchers, agencies were accompanying us in this process. And this is important to say because we cannot go alone. I mean, there are plenty of gaps. So we need to put all the elements together in order to make this happen. So we have this online course that took place last year, and this year, we will organize the online course together with ILO in the region of Latin America in Spanish, and we will do it also with 9 countries that we are accompanying in the process of developing lifelong learning policies. And we put emphasis 2 weeks just working with RBA, with these countries, in order for them to continue strengthening their RBA systems, and with a particular focus on migrants and refugees. I think it has been a challenging when it comes to these. We cannot say it's the same refugees and migrants. It's entirely different groups. They are treated in different way. We cannot say it's the same. And when it comes to legal migrants, illegal migrants, there's a lot behind it, and we need to be very, very clear, very concrete, that it needs to be contextualized. But we have also find during the literature review and the analysis of countries some key trends that are quite useful, I would say. I will start just saying that based on the work we did in 2012 for developing guidelines for RBA, that was already quite long ago. But interesting, because we went to receive a lot of information from countries, and now that we started the policy analysis and literature review, we got much more. So there's a clear trend in the increase of RBA system. We could see that in comparison, and also we could see that very clear reflected in the going into the countries and see how really a lot of countries are trying to stress the inclusive RBA with particularly vulnerable groups. So this is an important topic. Also, we could see that there are plenty of challenges when it comes to gaps. We could see the great work that is done in Europe. I think this is amazing. However, even we could say that in Europe, there are not many policies focusing on migrants and refugees. I mean, still there is a restriction on that. And then it's there where we could see in other regions how even with not so many countries with strong policy frameworks, they are doing a lot at the local level. which is also something to learn about, and how this bottom-up approach could be so useful for policies. Well, we find 5, 6 trends that I will go later on those ones. But thank you.
I think we're probably running out of time. I didn't bring up my watch. Can somebody warn me? Are we doing okay?
It's 9:35.
We're okay.
When do we have to finish?
I get lost in conversations, I have to warn you, and I hope you're the same as me with this. I am absolutely intrigued. There's so many things coming out. Raúl, one of the things that really struck me from the work you were doing was the capacity of so many of these jurisdictions to work at scale. And Ernesto, I'm wondering, with the inventories, are you seeing that? Are you seeing across Europe, are we scaling up?
I think it's happening, but maybe not at the level that, especially in Latin America, is happening to some extent. I think that in Europe, in a way, there is also a different, and I think this is important, what you were saying, Raúl, of the contextualization of the systems in a way. At the end of the day, each system is very different, and you are starting from a different point at the beginning. But I think what also you said, Raúl, is that there are certain principles, certain aspects, certain elements that are common to all the different systems. And I think that's where our work, in a way, it is trying to do. Make sure that those principles are there in place, make sure what is the best way to put them in place with research and stuff. But at the end of the day, I think the key issue is that each context is going to have a different answer to that specific problem. And we can learn from each other. I think that's the point of the inventories, that's the point of the best practices that we have. But it is at the end of the day, and it's interesting, and when they challenge you with the guidelines, for example, I love that we have criticism, and that's what it needs to be. But we as a European institution cannot impose on countries what they are supposed to do. We can tell them these are the different things that we think are important. This is the research that we have, that it says what is going to happen if you do certain things. But at the end of the day, it is the country that has to decide what is the specific implementation in the world. And for example, here in Ireland, you have the network that I think is doing a fantastic job. That is it's very specific in a way, but I think many other countries can learn from this, and I think it's a way of scaling up, coming back to your question, on bringing all these different things. So I think that there is a lot that we can learn from each other, but again, there is also differences that we need to take into account, and they are important. And it will be important in the context as an institutional, but also for the specific individual, and I think you were talking about that, Brikena, like the purpose of the validation process. Again, I think like in Latin America, what you are doing, what Diego presented on Mexico, Chile Valora also, like they are very specific for what they need in that specific context. And now we need to kind of try to create consistencies between the different systems, formal, non-formal, these parallel systems that are being created, that they are all in a way interconnected. So I think that's the way to scale.
Yes, connecting is so important for all of us. Christine, in terms of sort of the trends in learning, what should we be taking away? Because I think that's the question we're all asking, is we want to go back and to our base and take away, okay, what would you say the one thing we should think about is?
The one thing I think is that we need to build more evidence. But my list is longer. So let me get back to the evidence at the end. I very much would echo what both Raúl and Ernesto said, that the systems depend on their purpose. And the starting points for countries are different purposes. And what we've been seeing in countries in Asia or Africa, maybe also in Latin America, is that the issue of migration, refugee inclusion is an important one, access to labor markets. We have a very powerful example from Jordan, where RPL facilitated access to an occupational license and a work permit in occupations that were barred for foreigners. So, and that has been a big success and a big incentive to do RPL. There's also the objective of helping people transition to formality, improve the quality of the job they have, get them access to types of markets, not only for the refugees, but for people in the informal economy, to access public bidding or other types of services that were not available to them before. There's certainly also access to education and flexibilizing admission, but it's rather for access. So those are definitely some trends. There have been a number of pilots funded by agencies and development partners that have stayed pilots. And so it's very important to get these pilots owned by the countries and hence embedded within their own systems, and we see that happening, but it's a slow process. And it very much depends on how these pilots have been designed. And many have been designed in a way that the cost is too high, because countries in Africa, in Asia, often cannot, or people cannot afford that cost. So the one thing we are doing this year, among the many things, is developing a guide on costing RPL. So this is building on one pilot costing exercise we did in Kenya, but we're looking at several other countries, because the way, not only the financing of the system, but the costing itself and the distribution is so important for the scaling up. One other trend, and it's related to apprenticeship, which is the recommendation I mentioned before, is that countries see RPL as a way to recognize learning that happens in the workplace through an informal training arrangement. A number of countries still have a big system with millions of young people going through it. It's a traditional system, but it's known. Some call it traditional apprenticeship. We've been calling it informal apprenticeship or apprenticeship in the informal economy. And so countries would use recognition of prior learning, like Tanzania and others, to recognize the skills. Now, French-speaking countries, interestingly, would rather introduce end of apprenticeship certificate and offer RPL to the trainers, to the master crafts people. Because they say, well, it's not the same thing. You give a certificate to a learning process, so you recognize the learning process. But for master crafts people, you recognize anything they have done, their whole profession experience, etc. And so then on evidence, getting back to my first point, we do need evidence, and we need evidence as well to convince policymakers that the purpose for which they want to set up a system is actually going to work out. And hence we need the right indicators. We've done a number of tracer studies, but again, a tracer study doesn't give you the control group. The one study I would recommend you look at is by the World Bank from Bangladesh. It was a randomized control trial, very interesting, where they found a lot of positive effects, not only on self-confidence, but also on labor market outcomes. Thanks.
This is the question we're always asking here in Ireland, is what are the wider benefits of RPL? And I know across all our sectors, this is one of the questions that people ask, is how can we gather data on this? So we're really interested in that study. So thank you for alerting us to that. And this question of evidence is, of course, the most important one, because at policy level, this is of real importance. We can't improve if we don't have evidence of practice, of where the investment is needed, at which stage the investment is needed, and so on, and then of impacts. And Brikena, in your sector, you know, the people you represent, this is the area where it's most difficult to gather evidence, isn't it? Because communities are distributed and often difficult to hold on to. It's like mercury in water.
Yes, it is, but at the same time, I think we need to clarify what we mean by evidence and what is evidence, because very often when we use the term, we refer to scientific data. But in issues like this one, that, like you said, we are talking about a much wider, diverse group of population with different needs and communities that are more marginalized. Evidence can be just a single experience. So a single success story, a practice that has proven to be successful. So small practices here and there that have proven to be successful to a few individuals, for me, it's still good evidence to bring up to policies. So we really have to broaden up our understanding of what we mean by evidence. So also gather this more stories. I see Ernesto already got inspired.
Yeah, I want to bring the rank here, like make it a little bit more messy, because I think it's very important what you are saying, and I think that, I mean, we all agree. You were talking about evidence and some studies important. I think that we need all these different evidence, but again, for different purposes in a way. Because I think that one of the things that I think is happening quite a lot in the European countries, in the European context, is to present the stories of the people that have gone through validation. And we have seen here, actually, beautiful stories. I think this is important for advocacy. It's very important to kind of show it. But I do think that we need evidence that is more robust, that is built on larger studies, on larger, so we can kind of also, especially to convince policymakers. I don't know if in South America or where you are working, this is a key question most of the times, I guess.
You wanna?
No, keep going. Maybe I come later. It's a conversation.
No, I think it makes a lot of sense that, in a way, we are trying to understand the general trends, and for that we need to know a little bit of the general vision of it. And I think the more we can get, because there are plenty of gaps on that. And then when it comes to the experiences that are taking place more at the local, I think we need to collect more. Yeah. I was just discussing with some Spanish colleagues that they are working very much into recognition of social cohesion elements. I mean, it's really amazing how they are trying to recognize citizenship education, education for sustainable development, and a lot of things that are sometimes out of the radar, and we need to bring them on board. So I think it needs to go very much clearly in the bottom-up approach, and how individual, this is able to change the life of people, and we need to show that. Yeah. But also really the general trends and legal frameworks that are so relevant in order to make a change that can be scaled up, really. Yes?
I don't want to let Brikena lose the word, because I've heard stories in Brikena's company, and it reminded me a little bit about what Julie shared yesterday about to know and to do, to live together and to be. And I think that this is really what we're talking about, and maybe this is because a lot of the conversations that we've had, and because I'm sure we're out of time now, are we, Nan? We're still doing okay? Oh, great. Because I think it's one of the conversations we've had as a consortium and as a co-organisers group, is how to keep the conversation going beyond the Biennale as a global community of practice. And that perhaps we can put out calls for case studies across the different communities, so that we are developing these stories, because when you recognize other people who are just like me, you think, oh golly, well, yeah, maybe we can do something here, because there are such extraordinary things. And later in the program today, we'll be hearing some of those case studies, which are pretty phenomenal at different levels. Some of them are personal, and some of them are systemic. But keep going, Brikena, please.
No, I mean, on that point, that was what I wanted to say, is this combining the statistical, the more broader data with also this very experienced stories. But to me, what I wanted to bring more to the discussion is the frustrations we often see for, no matter if we have or not the data of who is taking care of that data and in which way they are taking care of the data and how much they are actually leading to any revolution in validation. And unfortunately, we still see a lot of silos of who is actually in charge of validation. Is it the employment people? Is it the education people? Is it inclusion people? So who is actually at the ministry or the government level taking care is always a difficult question, and we see that it's very scattered. So this, we kind of trying to call and promote the idea of the whole government approach when it comes to validation and lifelong learning, because we see them having impact on society as a whole. So they have to be treated as something that all government is concerned about, not just one particular ministry. So this is something that really, I think it's very important to break all this silos, and policies yet are not doing so. So yeah, that's probably an area we still need to work a lot. So if there are countries, continents that are good at it, please raise your hand. We are looking for good practices. But definitely an area for improvements.
Definitely. That came up actually in some of our pre-conference conversations, that depending on where the policy is situated in terms of ultimate responsibility, that actually really does impact in terms of outcomes. I can't remember which of you wise owls made that point, but somebody did. And it was actually a really important point. So somebody is going to pick this up somewhere along the day. Anyway, Raúl, can you come back to us and tell us more about the trends, I suppose, and the things we should be taking away in terms of the learning and the things to reflect more? And I think particularly for all of us, because we are thinking in terms of migration and mobility, and being deeply respectful of people in emergency contexts and of cultural sensitivities around migration and refugees.
Thank you very much. I need to say that this work that we're doing was very much inspired by a former colleague, Madhu Singh, who was, very, very much into this topic, and well, now it's quite reminds me of her work, and she was very much into this, really, and it's amazing to remind her. And she published this book in 2018 for migrants and refugees based on the Syrian crisis. And then we found that it was easy to find good examples when they came to Europe, but not with the neighborhoods countries. That was more difficult. And we tried to focus that work on Lebanon, Egypt, how they were coping with it. And we could find very interesting local examples. There are not strong legal frameworks, but we could see that there's a policy for IBA focus on migrants and refugees. It's not a holistic one as the one we heard from Conocer, for example. That's more like for everybody who would like to certificate. Doesn't matter if it's just a newcomer or just passing, but these particular policies were focused on this population. And they are more agile, I would say, more flexible. The problem is scaling up. That's always the kind of challenge. But I think we can learn from these experiences because they are, in a way, different than what is happening in Europe. They are quite representing the context. So I think we have these two levels, and we need to, a little bit following what you're saying, Brikena, we need to learn more of the local. What is happening there? How this could be a learning process for us to understand how this could be applied in other regions of the world, and then how to scale it up to make a policy also that could be so inclusive on this perspective. It was very important element to consider that in some cases, this articulation between the bottom-up and the top-down policies are not necessarily linked. And it's there where we wanted to influence more. In those cases, for example, I would say that this case in Venezuela, people moving a lot to Brazil or to Colombia. So there are a lot of practices taking place at the local level, and there are already, in some cases, some structures at the legal level, but they are not connected. So there's also something that we need to work more. How can we link these different levels of states? Because it's something that we need it clearly, and they can talk to each other. It's not a privilege one or the other, but that's also something that we could easily can reinforce very much, and we have been thinking on and trying to connect this with specific countries. So I would say that in general, the experiences outside Europe are quite interesting, quite innovative, quite flexible. We need to learn a lot of that. But we need to be able to link it with structures, more robust RBA systems that are linked to national qualification frameworks and all that we already know. Thank you.
Ernesto, you're going to get the last word, and then we have a few minutes for questions from the floor. Thank you. So Ernesto, learning that we should really take heed to.
Well, I want to follow on what Raúl was saying about the fact that it needs to be that connectedness. I think one of the words that I repeat over and over every time I talk, so everybody probably has heard it here, is consistency and kind of coherence between the different systems and the different phases of validation, but also between the different sectors and to some extent between the different countries. So I think that coherence kind of is where we need to work on. And I think forums like this are trying to do that. I think that, again, we need the evidence to kind of see what is that works, but in different contexts, different things are going to work. So again, we need the evidence localized. And I think that we need the conversation going, and I think that that's really why we are here in a way.
So thank you so much. I think just some extraordinary reflections. I guess the big notes I'm hearing are things around valuing flexibility, being willing to, within that flexibility, to connect to frameworks, to be open to different kinds of qualifications, valuing robust systems and coherence, to design in validation, exciting work in terms of guides to costing, which I think we're all interested in, evidence, giving attention to evidence, thinking about scaling up, connecting cases of validation right across different sectors, thinking about that. What else have I got down here now? I've got so many notes, and I'll have to just put them together, and we'll be coming back on that. Thinking about lifelong learning policies. And I'm sure you've got questions now, so while you've been framing those, we're ready to, I can't see out because the lights are really bright. So who's going to ask? Oh, we've got somebody waving down this end. Have we got someone with a roving mic? Where are we going now? There's somebody down here standing up. Come on. Julie Reddy has a question, and there's someone coming.
So you go first.
So we've got one mic up here, and one is gone. One is gone roving.
Hi, great. Thank you very much. I wanted to, this was a very useful panel. I wanted to pick up on the evidence topic, and I have a great memory, it's just not long. What I remember from my home country, Canada, I think the province of Manitoba, was that there was a policy for lifelong learning, and one of the reasons for that policy for lifelong learning was the impact on health, the impact on public health. And I didn't hear about that just now. I'm just wondering if anybody has any comments on that. Obviously, you want policymakers to do things for the right reasons, but also enlightened self-interest might be helpful.
I don't want to promote this, but okay, you make the point, so I will do it. We have a very interesting program in UNESCO. It's called UNESCO Global Network of Learning Cities. because in a way, we found that it's sometimes better to work at the local level because the city authorities are the closest to the people. And it's there where we can have more intersectorial approaches. And precisely because of COVID, we started working on lifelong learning policies for health and well-being, and structuring a kind of guidance for cities to start implementing specific approaches to it. We haven't been, so we have a kind of toolkit already for that, and it's applied around 350 cities. What we don't have still, it's a toolkit for recognizing that. And that would be something quite relevant. But I think this kind of transversality is the relevance of it. Yeah, sorry.
I can add something. I know that NALA, our National Adult Literacy Agency, have conducted a study. I don't know if there's anybody here who can speak to it, but certainly in our vet sector, there's a bit of work done in that respect, and that there are direct links between improved health and well-being and engagement in education and training in the widest sense of the word, and that was evidence for increased investment in the initial, in programs leading towards the initial level of the framework, and that was taken on board by our ministry. It's not that long ago that research was done. It was evidence-based. Thanks. So more questions?
Yeah.
Oh, great, Julie.
So just 2 comments and observations. So thank you for the interesting high-level conversation. But you know, I mean, we were talking quite a bit about putting the learner at the center and the refugee asylum seeker. And I was very happy at the opening event. We had learners speak for themselves, but we should have had people who are what I don't like the word beneficiaries, but the learners, the refugee asylum seeker, tell us what they do. Because sometimes we speak for them and we voice their narrative and we don't give them voices. Similarly, I've been just astounded with my conversations with the people who work on the ground, the actual RPL mediators and assessors that I've spoken to over breakfast and everything else. And those are the lessons learned, creative strategies, because despite the bureaucratic obstacles they face in their institutions, they plod along, they find ways. And those are what the people on the ground, the RPL practitioners, need to learn and get documented and find a kind of a support group, a lifeline. Keep going. Let me motivate you guys. It can be done. And they need that on the ground. But also my last thing, and that's why now I'll ask my question. I think our interventions as change makers and influencers need to be leveled. At different levels, we need different strategies. Because I sometimes think we only talk at a high level and we forget the people who actually do the work on the ground. And I'd like to hear what your agencies are doing to actually reach the people at the ground level and make a difference. How are you documenting? Sharing lessons learned. Even in the case studies, I find it a bit too academic. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot for the comment and the question, and I couldn't agree more. You know, we've only had a few minutes, but you find plenty of great stories of learners, participants in RPL schemes on our website. So we have videos of these that document a lot, and I mean. The work on transitions to formality, so working with people in the informal economy, is where you have to start bottom up, because this is where you need to understand how people make their choices and what would actually constitute an added value for them. So that's where you have to start. I mean, we've worked a lot with professional associations, crafts associations, but then also the workers and the employees organizations. And these associations would align to or liaise with or whatever. So that's the, I would say, the very important bottom-up approach. But you do need all this policy debate because we still have a lot of countries that do not have any systems on recognition of prior learning. We only have informal ways. And in order to create a profession, you need that buy-in from policymakers.
Yeah, I also fully agree. You know, I think that is very important to work at different levels, I think. And as I said, I think that at the European level, what we are seeing is that we need to actually move the discussion a little bit farther down, also in the agency stuff. And of course, our mandate is at the policy level. So we have to see in what way. And I think forums like this, again, networks, stuff like that, can help with still having a discussion, as Christina was saying, like the importance of having that discussion at the policy level, no? So I think that it's fundamental that we have different discussions at different levels. And that's also why it's difficult sometimes in a group like this, with so much diversity, so many different needs, in a way, to kind of bring them together. I still think that there's a lot that we can learn from each other. Again, that coherence that I was talking about. But it is for sure that you need also some specificities on the specific levels to work. And I think that we see that difficulty here. But thanks for the question.
Just, well, thank you, Julie, because you made a point. And when we try to get the information from the 9 countries that I just referred to, we had the survey for different levels of governmental structure and, of course, the learner. And I would say in the 9 countries, we just managed to get 1 survey from the learner themselves. It was so difficult, so difficult. And I mean, it was clear that there was a gap, and we tried hard. But of course, when you go down, you need to put more efforts into it because it's more difficult. And of course, it's a challenge, but we need to go through.
Yeah, thank you very much as well for raising this. I mean, my organization works with the people, and we create different spaces and moments throughout the year for them to tell stories and give them a voice. Of course, this probably was a place for more experts, but still, I think we have the Lifelong Learning Week every year where we bring these stories of the people and the people telling the stories to European institutions so that they can really see what they are working for and what are the needs in the ground. The annual position paper on a particular issue as well. We tell the stories there, the good practices that exist. So we create different channels to communicate those individual stories, which are very important indeed. And we are, among our organizations, our learners associations, unions as well. So they are there to be vocal and stand for themselves and say that they should be at the table of decision and policy making. So I think, yeah, there are attempts, but probably we can do more for sure, especially at a higher level. And we are still not considered, we're still struggling to be considered fully in the policy and decision making as an equal partner. So this, for sure, individuals associations or people's associations are yet just consumers of policies rather than designers of the policies. So that I would be on your side.
We have another question here. Thanks.
Hello. I'm speaking from a Manitoban and Canadian perspective on this issue because I find a real issue. Am I speaking okay? Yes. A real difference between policy and programs that in my perspective, policies are big ideas. And the question is about whether they're actionable at all at a local level or whether they are just sort of removed from, I call it, the real world. So I'm just wondering about another way to look at this thing about sort of the consistency that Brikena, your point about it's the meeting in the middle. and that the policy development needs to be both bottom-up and top-down, and that if you are going to make action that is going to be applicable to individuals or communities, then you, policymakers, I'm going to put my foot in my mouth here, need to come off their high chair and actually speak with the real people in the corner store, that they're going to inform you whether the policies are applicable to them or not. And so that's a huge, huge challenge. But it also deals with the issue of evidence, and that evidence is experiential for sure, and that you really need to hear the voice and the collective voice of individuals who are going to be the recipients of any policy, whether it's lifelong learning. It doesn't really matter what the big idea is, but the alienation that happens in the world is primarily because of the difference of voice, and the language that we use articulates the problems that we face. And so unless we can speak with a consistent language, consistent words about community well-being, we're talking at odds, and there's not going to be any real improvement in the lifelong learning process that we're all part of. So anyway, so it's not really a question, but just a comment.
Can I ask where you're from, please?
Brandon, Manitoba, Brandon University.
Okay, so you're from Canada.
From Canada.
Okay, well, welcome to Ireland. I have to say, in terms of language, one of the great fun parts of organising this and working with Nan and Susan across the consortia was we realised so often that what we thought we understood each other was saying wasn't what we thought, wasn't what was being said. So coming to a common language is a lot of work. So great empathy in that respect. And across our just about 90 presentations today, I think, over the today and yesterday, it must just be great fun trying to understand what we're all saying and talking about, because it is really different. So welcome to that. In Ireland, certainly in our practitioner network, we understand that we're all ploughing the same field, that we have different implements. So whether you're working in a so-called policy space at national, regional or local level, whether you're a quality assurance manager, whether you're an assessor or a teacher or a champion, whatever it is you're doing, but we're all ploughing the same field, and that tends to be how we come at this. We've different remits and responsibilities, but we just all pick up the shovel and go to work. Anyway, Raúl, you might like to respond.
Well, I think that thank you for the valuable comment, and the more we can have a kind of I would say a well-oiled system that could go through the different levels, it could be very useful. I'm not sure that this can be recognized or validated by the different countries, but at least to have examples on that. I like very much, I need to say, the case of the Republic of Korea. When it comes to implementing lifelong learning, it's very clearly established at the national level, and who are the implementers of that. And it goes down into the different states of government, onto cities, community learning centers, and what do they need to do. So it's quite, in a way, it could be a narrow view of lifelong learning, but it's a very well-oiled system. I think we need to keep going on that in order to see like different models, how this could work.
Anybody else? Okay. Have we one more question? One down the back. Nora, is it?
Yeah, it is.
Hi, Nora.
Hiya. Quite a few of the panel members mentioned trying to influence policy makers, but you didn't really talk about what you would like to influence them to do. So I suppose from my perspective, I come from the Irish Universities Association, and particularly at national level, we're looking for more sustainable funding for the universities and higher education institutions to deliver recognition of prior learning. But maybe to Ernesto in particular, on the back of the recent inventory, what do you see as the the key asks of policymakers at the moment?
I think that it's, and I think it's similar in many other jurisdictions in a way, is this idea that we need to justify in a way why is it important, how is it important, and how can it make it work. So I think that at the European level, as I said, because we have the 2012 recommendation in a way, I think that that helped quite a lot. The NQFs have, I think, helped a lot also in kind of developing the system. So at the European level, I think there is a clear, let's say, I wouldn't say mandate because it's not that strong, but there is a clear idea that this is an important element. And I think something that maybe we haven't discussed enough in the panel now and in general the whole day is that, again, validation is seen as an element on all these different policies of lifelong learning in a way. And it is only one element, and it needs to work together with other elements that are as important as validation. And of course, we are focusing on validation. I've been working on it for more than 10 years, so we are very much self-centered many times. But I think it's important to take into account that there are other elements that need to work together with validation, and that they need to kind of be in the system. So one of the things that we are trying to do more and more is create, again, that consistency between different policies in different levels. And I think that is also what kind of, you need to create a wider policy kind of that is bringing in validation, having it as an element. But I think if there is one element that I am always missing, and I have been missing it for the last 10 years, so also our fault to some extent, it is really the evidence. We don't have enough data. We don't have enough information that is robust enough. We have some very good cases, and I think we have information there. We have a lot of good cases, and now they need to be more consistency, make it more, we need more of that community of practice that I think we are building on research also, on basic research. So I think that's also one element that I think it is away from the policy, I think, but it is a way of connecting to policy. Maybe it's because I like research.
So concluding the panel, I'd just like to thank everybody for all the preparation that you did for this, for traveling the distances that you came for this, and for your really marvelous contributions. We really appreciate it. This is a policy day. We thought that your interest as a gathering is to really take forward from this Biennale for the next 2 years until the next one, the directions and trends in policy that will help us all as practitioners to have a sense of the directions in which we're going from a global perspective, taking forward what we've learned over the last 2 years since we were all together in Reykjavik, learning from what has been done and from the work that's been ongoing in the policy spaces and from the new directions that are coming, so that we have that in our heads as we go forward, learning with the practitioners and with all the wonderful work that's being shared across the concurrent sessions, the lightning talks, and through our engagement with each other. So that's been the framework in which we've constructed the program. The other thing I really want to thank Raúl for doing is for calling to our minds Madhu Singh, our very, very dear friend. Madhu was not far from our minds in putting the program together. For those of you that knew her, she was a very, very special person and somebody who graced several of our gatherings of some of the Biennale and many, many, many RPL gatherings around Europe, and who contributed hugely to scholarship and to the development of policy and practice in RPL, and we miss her very, very dearly. So thank you, Raúl, for that. Thanks to the panel. Take care, everyone.